Good afternoon and welcome to the Understanding the New Apprenticeship Levy delivered through the CMI to try and bring you up to date with everything that's going on in the world of apprenticeships and to help you navigate your way through the levy and the latest guidance. My name is Alison Cox. I'm Head of Apprenticeships here at the Chartered Management Institute. And first of all, can I just quickly ask if somebody could type into the questions box and let me know if you can actually see my screen okay and if you can hear me. Oh, fabulous. Thank you, Joe. You were first off the mark. Fantastic. Okay. Well, welcome and thank you very much for giving up some of your very precious time. I know everyone's weeks are very busy, so we really do appreciate it. This is the first of this type of webinar that we've actually decided to run, and hopefully it'll be the first of many. So we will look forward to feedback on how you found it and whether it's been a valuable use of your time. We've actually got a wide range of different types of organisations and sectors who have joined the webinar today, and I'd like to thank you for that. We actually have some providers, we have some large and small employers, and some universities, so that's a really good mix, and it'll be very interesting to see what questions you have after the presentation's been delivered. The presentation will take probably about 30 minutes and then we will move to questions. You should all be able to see a questions box on the side of the screen on the right hand side, so I'll take those at the end, but please do type questions as we go and then I will do my best to respond to as many as I can. If I can't get through them all, then I will do my best to respond to questions after the webinar. We will be finishing by 2:30 at the absolute latest. And if you do have any technical issues, then my colleague Lynn Monteith will be helping and able to provide some additional support. The webinar is actually being recorded, so for those of you that are watching it, you will be able to then share it with colleagues should you feel you wish to, and for those who unfortunately can't join us, then obviously they will also be able to see what's happened. So what we'll be covering today is really just a bit about what the changing landscape looks like in relation to apprenticeships, what the new implications are around the levy coming in and the changes to the funding based on the guidance issued by the government very recently, and then a little bit about how we can help here at CMI in relation to leadership and management, and in particular the new Trailblazer standards that have been developed by the Trailblazer group looking at that particular area. But just to kick off, just a little bit about Chartered Management Institute. We are a professional body, an awarding body, and we are the only organisation that can actually assess and approve as chartered status for the management profession. Our vision and mission are all about better led and better managed organisations, and underpinning all of that, increasing the number of professional managers we have and the standard and the capability that those individuals are able to work to. So it's all about, for us, creating a true profession. And therefore you can probably understand why, for us, being involved in the development of these new apprenticeship standards was absolutely fundamental. It was without question that it was something we wanted to do, because these are a new mechanism, a new way for employers across the country to be able to look at what their managers need to be able to do and how they can actually train and develop those individuals, whether they're new to their organisation or existing staff, to help them develop into really true, competent professional managers. But the landscape is changing, and hopefully all of you who have joined the webinar today will know that we have a whole new regime coming in. It's a whole new world in relation to apprenticeships. And all of this has been underpinned by a whole range of apprenticeship reform, which has been introduced over the past couple of years, and it's actually been underpinned by a change in government policy following the 2012 review of apprenticeships and the recommendations that were made to change the way apprenticeships were designed and delivered, to raise quality, to raise participation levels, and to increase business engagement. And underpinning all of this, looking at the way that apprenticeships are funded and bringing in a new funding mechanism. We have a funding mechanism now in place currently for new starts against the new Trailblazer standards, and we also have the existing funding models for the frameworks that already exist for apprenticeships across a whole range of sectors and occupations. But what the opportunity is now, start again. The opportunity that we now have is actually a huge one, because actually these fundamental reforms, which are known as trailblazers, have put employers in the driving seat. And it's all about designing the new standards and putting them in control of the funding that they have. It's about simplifying the apprenticeship standards to make them new, short, easy to understand standards which an employer or an individual or a parent or a provider picking up would easily understand and recognise the knowledge, skills and behaviours that are required for a particular occupation or role. And also then there's a further shift in terms of actually ensuring that the new standards do deliver a robust opportunity for training and development of that individual of a minimum of 12 months, and after that process to actually go through a rigorous synoptic endpoint assessment. So really testing out that the individual truly can demonstrate and display all of those knowledge, skills and behaviours that would be expected of them in that role. So it's a very different model to the one that has gone before. And here in this slide you can just see that this is a nice little visual of the process that's followed through the Trailblazer apprenticeship programmes. So what we have is the combination of on-the-job learning, which is an absolutely vital part of the apprenticeship process, followed by a number of areas where there may be training or there may be qualifications built in to the delivery of the on-programme component of the apprenticeship. Some of the apprenticeship standards do have mandatory training or qualification built in for certain occupations, but the majority are actually open, and it will be down to the employer and the provider to agree whether a training qualification is absolutely the way that they would like to go as part of that programme. The apprentice then moves into a gateway, which is really just that confirmation stage where the individual, the employer and the provider feel that the apprentice is ready to move forward to the endpoint assessment. And at that point, once the endpoint assessment has been passed, they will receive their certificate to say that they have achieved that apprenticeship standard. So again, a very different model to the way that frameworks are delivered at the moment and have been delivered in the past. And this is obviously taking some employers and providers time to get their head around to fully understand how this process works. But actually, in terms of the employer feedback that we've certainly received, they really welcome this as being a brave new world in the way that apprenticeships can be delivered, and very much putting them in control of having that conversation with the provider about delivering the apprenticeship programme that it best fits for them and the individual. And underlying this, what we see is a changing sort of world of perceptions. So we actually see that we are moving now to it being all about a specific occupational role. We are seeing it as an opportunity to both encourage young people into a career, and very much viewing it in terms of career development, but also really excitingly and a whole change again for the way apprenticeships traditionally have been sort of particularly promoted, is actually the mid-career development opportunity that it presents. So being able to train up and develop those existing members of staff and help them progress forward in their careers in your organisations. And again, another change in all of this landscape is that there are no age restrictions to any of this. So previously, funding has been very much attached to working with young people through apprenticeships, but now anybody in an organisation is actually in scope. And that's a very exciting and game-changing opportunity for organisations looking at how they want to introduce apprenticeships into their organisations and how they actually want to maximise the use of the funding and their levy spend. And another key change is really ensuring that link to professional registration and recognition as part of career development. So where there are professional bodies associated with roles, making sure that that opportunity for that professional recognition is highlighted and recognised by an apprentice and the employer. So hopefully many of you will already be aware of the benefits of apprenticeships to organisations, but this is being tracked, and we do have some statistics that are being put out there now for us to be able to take into account when we're thinking about whether apprenticeships are something that we would like to invest in or not. So what we do know is that for every £1 of government invested in apprenticeships, £18 is generated for the wider economy. So a massive return on that £1 investment in terms of how profitable and productive and competitive our country is. We also know that for the employers that take on an apprentice, what we see is that actually productivity in relation to the apprentice's work actually is £214 a week more on average. So they are delivering a huge amount back into the workplace. So the investment in the time and the support and financially into that apprenticeship actually delivers a huge return for the business itself. And we also know that quite often employers will say, gosh, if I train the individual, they're going to leave. But actually, we also know the adage to that of, but what if they stay and we don't train them? But if we do train our apprentices, what we do know is that 71% on average will stay with that employer. So the loyalty and the return, again, is a long-term commitment by the apprentice to the employer they work with. And what we also know is that the majority of employers say that actually having apprenticeships in their organisation is fundamentally improving quality and service across the organisation. So big organisational impact that can be seen. But what we shouldn't lose sight of as well is the fact there's actually benefits to apprentices in this process as well. So what we do know is that actually 84%, so a huge percentage of apprentices are actually saying their career prospects have improved. And that doesn't necessarily mean outside of the organisation they've undertaken their apprenticeship with. That could be developing their career within the organisation going forward. And also what we know is that apprentices that complete a higher level apprenticeship, so 4, 5, 6, 7, even level 8, actually can earn a huge amount more in their career than they would if they didn't undertake an apprenticeship. And many of you may well have already seen that actually some recently published research undertaken by Barclays and the Centre for Economics and Business Research, entitled Productivity and Lifetime Earnings of Apprenticeships and Graduates, actually has cited Barclays' view that an apprentice could actually earn up to 270% more than a traditional graduate. So that's really changing the way that apprenticeships are perceived and what that return for the individual as well as the organisation might be. So that's really just a little bit of scene setting about why apprenticeships are important, why they're things that we should be considering as something to develop our workforce. But what we do know is that in this new landscape, there's a huge investment that's going to be made into apprenticeships by 2020. Some £2.5 billion will be going in. And that funding will be generated through government and through the forthcoming levy. So this is really just a quick slide, perhaps a little bit busy, just an overview really of the funding changes that we're starting to see. And so what we know is that the new apprenticeship levy, having had quite a bit of debate about would it, won't it, will it happen, is actually going to come in from the 6th of April next year. And the levy actually will be charged to employers where their payroll is 3 million or above. And it will be charged at 0.5% of their total PAYE bill, and it will actually be taken by HMRC. So it will be taken on a monthly basis, and so that payment will be made. What each employer has is a £15,000 allowance towards that, and this is what will make sure that those organisations that do not have a pay bill of 3 million or above will not pay into the levy. And obviously the £15,000 allowance will be there for those employers who fall outside of the scope of the levy as well as in. And for those that do pay the levy, will actually have a 10% top-up added to their pot of funding by the government as a little extra incentive to help them maximise the return they can get from the funding and the opportunities that they will have around apprenticeships. The new funding system will actually kick in from May 2017. And for those that are paying the levy, that will be through a digital account. And the government are releasing at the moment in the guidance, but also there'll be more to come, around what that digital account process will look like, how it will work. But the best articulation I've heard around this is that it actually looks very much like an online bank account. So you can see what your balance is, you can see how much has been debited, and you can see how much you've still got to play with. So it's a very straightforward system and will enable the levy payers to identify which provider they want to work with and to ensure that the payments go to that provider for that particular apprenticeship. Within the digital account, we will also have access to the register of providers who can deliver apprenticeships, and there's a new provider register that is going to be created to make sure that we have a really comprehensive listing of providers who are really competent, capable of delivering high quality apprenticeships for employers. And also within this mix, that's a lot about the levy itself, but what we shouldn't lose sight of is there's a really exciting mix in here for the non-levy payers, where those organisations, which is 98% of employers in England, will actually have 90% of their training costs met, so they will only need to make a 10% contribution. And what I would like to highlight here is that when we talk about the levy kicking in April, that's when it will start, and that's when the legislation kicks in. But the new funding mechanism will only kick in from May 2017 onwards. So any apprentice that is started on their journey prior to May 2017 will be on the existing funding model. So that's the 2/3, 1/3 contribution model, where the employer puts in 1/3 and the government puts in the other 2/3. So just a little heads up really there on that particular piece. We're really pleased now to be able to include in our slide deck some slides that we've actually seen from the Department of Education. We've actually been working really closely with formerly the Department for Business Innovation and Skills, and obviously as things have shifted over in terms of the government changes with the Department for Education around the whole apprenticeship agenda, because we have been working to really be a leading light in terms of being able to share the exciting news and opportunities around apprenticeships, particularly in relation to leadership and management. So this really just gives you a quick overview of what the digital apprenticeship service will look like, and you will obviously have these slides afterwards, so you'll be able to digest the detail in more time than we have here to go through it. But really it's a staged process that the service will take the employers through, so it will help you plan your apprenticeship programme, choose the right apprenticeship providers. It will give you the opportunity to advertise your vacancies, and I know a number of employers I've spoken to, that's one of the areas they're really sort of struggling with in terms of how do we get the message out there, how do we advertise our opportunities, how do we reach the new marketplace of young people and sort of existing people in the workforce who might be wanting to look at an apprenticeship. And it will also help you manage the funding for your apprenticeship. So as we talked about the online bank account and how to start a new apprenticeship contract. So it will take you through this in nice, easy stages to make sure that it's a really straightforward process. This is for employers next year who will be paying the levy. The employers that are not paying the levy will actually not use the digital account until at least 2018. So they will then be invited into using the digital service going forward. So the employers that are not using the digital apprenticeship service and are not paying the levy will use the existing funding processes that are in place at the moment and liaise directly with the training providers. And all of this is also underpinned by an agenda to simplify the funding. So, and it may not look it when you see that there are now 15 bands of funding available. But what we do know is at the moment we have various different funding models depending on the age of the apprentice, depending on what the framework is or the standard is. And so there's quite a complicated mix. So what we will have going forward is a single funding band for new and existing apprenticeship frameworks and standards. So they will all be mapped into and the next slide articulates this nicely, the different level of funding bands that there will be. And what these bands show are the upper limits of the funding that will be available. So this will give you a very clear idea. And with the Trailblazer standards, what the government have tried to do is ensure that we actually match as closely as possible the funding bands that were allocated to those Trailblazer standards into this new banding sort of guidelines, these 15 bands. It isn't necessarily the case with some of the other apprenticeship frameworks, but there is in the guidance documentation the opportunity to look at the apprenticeship framework or standard that you were interested in, and it will then tell you which funding band limit is proposed for that particular apprenticeship. And what all of this is about is a co-investment model, and there are two types of employers who will be benefiting from government support. So there are the employers who have not paid into the levy but still want to engage in the apprenticeship agenda and purchase training from a provider. There are also the levy-paying employers who, once they've spent their levy funding, may not have funds in their account to pay for the cost of training once they've drawn down for their apprenticeship programmes. In both of those situations, what the government will be offering is the 90% contribution and 10% by the employer. And what we should highlight here is that it is actually a cost to the employer. It is a cash contribution. It's not in kind. It is actually a cash contribution. So that's the model that's going forward. The levy will obviously be drawn down by each organisation that's paid it, and they will use that to fund apprenticeships up to the amount they have in their levy pot. And really, it's important to highlight that the shift towards the government funding 90% and the employer funding 10% was quite a radical change. There were hints circulating around, but no one really quite expected such a generous funding model. The 2/3, 1/3 model was felt to be quite generous, but this is really a game changer for employers. And for small employers, so those with less than 50 staff, if they're taking on a 16 to 18-year-old, the government will actually fund 100% of that apprenticeship. So really trying to make it attractive for smaller employers to get involved. And certainly I'm attending an FSB, Federation of Small Business, event last week in Liverpool. What we heard was there was a real endorsement for the fact that government had listened to the challenge around funding apprenticeships, and that these changes were really going to help small businesses in particular move towards taking on even more apprenticeships than they do already. And what we do know from the Federation of Small Businesses Make or Break report is that they believe small firms could actually deliver 1 million more apprenticeships towards the 3 million target that the government has by 2020. And this is just an example to show you that within the funding limits, how it would work in terms of the actual value of an apprenticeship. So this is really in the digital account. So this is for the levy payers at this point in time. So where we have a funding band limit allocated to a framework, a standard, you will then as an employer be able to negotiate with your provider as to what you actually are going to pay for that particular standard. And if the cost is within the funding band limit, so it might be under the £6,000, then obviously what will be deducted from the digital account is the £5,000 that's been negotiated, and that will be in equal chunks each month that will be paid out. But if there is no money in the account left for a levy payer, so all of the money has been spent, then the government will pay the 90% and the employer will then have to top in the 10%. So that just shows how that can work. If it's above the actual funding band limit, then the cap will apply and the government will pay in and to support the £6,000 in this example for a £7,500 band. But what will happen is that the employer will need to top that up. So they will need to put in more money to make up the difference. And that is also the same for an employer who is receiving the 90%, 10%. So if it's above the funding band, then the employer will be responsible for meeting the cost of any additional cost for that particular standard. And there could be valuable reasons why the cost could be higher than the funding band is set at. You may want to negotiate some additional training to be built in. You may wish to have slightly different delivery models, but it's all a negotiation. And this is where the employer very much is in charge of the funding and how it's used. What the government have also wrapped into all of this is additional support for apprentices. So they recognise that there is a real need to look after apprentices, and that with these new standards and the new way apprenticeships are delivered, that this is quite demanding for the employer and also for the providers. So for the 16 to 18-year-olds, there will be an extra £1,000 payable to the employer and a further £1,000 to the providers to help with additional support and extra costs to support those young people in their apprenticeship programme. And the way that that will be paid is that it will be 2 equal payments, one at 3 months and one at the 12-month point. So it's just recognising that there is that extra support that is required. And they will also put in money for an employer who is looking to take on disadvantaged young people. So again, a further £1,000 to the employer and a further £1,000 to the training providers for 19 to 24-year-olds who are leaving care or have a local authority education and healthcare plan. And again, it's in recognition that the delivery of apprenticeships for those individuals may require some additional support. So really looking to provide a bit of wraparound care for those young people coming into the apprenticeship world. Also, there's a recognition that individuals may well need additional learning support, so where they may have conditions such as dyslexia or disabilities, there will be up to £150 a month to support those learners, and if there are extra costs that need to be met, then those will be looked at on a case-by-case basis. And as you would expect, underpinning all of this, the government's commitment to raising standards in English and maths is a paramount area. So if an individual does not already have either a level 1 or level 2 standard in English and maths, we will look to move them up to a minimum of a level 2, and those will be fully funded by the government through the providers to make sure that the individuals come out with that particular standard by the end of their apprenticeship. And there are a number of funding rules that sit underneath all of this as well. And certainly when talking to a number of particularly larger employers, one of the areas that's been talked about a lot is about how they can work with their supply chain or how they can work with fellow employers around the whole apprenticeship agenda. So the government is proposing at the moment in 2018 to introduce a mechanism by which employers could transfer up to 10% of the money in their levy pot. So this is very much the large employers who are paying into the levy to move some of their money across either to another employer, so that could be someone in their supply chain, or it could be to an ATA, which is an Apprenticeship Training Association. So there are different models, and this will move forward, and we will receive more information on how this will work next year. And I know that a number of you on the webinar, and certainly a number of the organisations we've been speaking to, are not in England, and they have been asking questions about how will it work in the devolved nations. We're still waiting for more information really from the devolved governments about how the levy pots will be spent and what that funding approach will look like in those particular nations. But the government is recognising that there is a need for flexibility in the process. Employers have individuals who are working across nations, so they have built into this a mechanism where they can actually fund an apprentice through the English funding model, where the apprenticeships taking place and the main place of employment is in England. So it might well be that obviously they could be live in Scotland, but if they're mainly working in England, then that is where they will be able to draw the funding for that particular apprenticeship. So some interesting areas starting to come through, and there'll be again more information to follow about how this will work. But I think for me the most exciting bit in all of this is actually the prior qualifications box at the top there. One of the conversations we've had with a lot of employers has been around actually how do I support individuals who may have come into my organisation with say a degree, but the role they're doing bears no relation to the subject matter of their degree, and actually the role they have is at a different level in our organisation. And whilst there have been some shift in terms of government agreeing that, for example, with the Chartered Manager Degree Apprenticeship, if an individual had a degree but it was in, say, philosophy, then actually it was okay to put them through the CMDA apprenticeship because the degree would be in a completely different subject matter. What we've now seen is a proposed move to where actually there will be the flexibility to move people down to lower level qualifications in support of their role that they're in now. So that's a very exciting opportunity and really opens up much more opportunity for employers to think about all of their workforce and the most pertinent apprenticeship and the apprenticeship level for that particular role. So that's a key area really to bear in mind when you're thinking about your apprenticeship planning going forward. One of the things here at CMI we developed, and we actually developed it back in November, was actually a levy calculator to help employers start to think about how the levy pot that they're paying might impact on their organisation, and in respect particularly of what that could look like in terms of purchasing leadership and management apprenticeships. So that's just a little screenshot that shows you the levy calculator, and you have the link at the bottom of the screen there to take advantage of this particular opportunity. And it will quickly tell you that based on your levy payment and the allowance that you have, how many of your managers you could actually put through the different levels of leadership and management apprenticeship standards that are newly developed and available for employers to use. And what I'd like to highlight at this particular point in time is that the government guidance and tools area is exceptionally good. They're all on the .gov website, and they do set out all of the detail in very straightforward language and are particularly helpful to guide you through the process. But what we're seeing at the moment is actually we're in a very short phase of consultation. So you will have the links here, and it's really important that you take a chance to look at the proposals and feed back your views. on whether you think these funding proposals look right, whether they will meet your needs, and you have until the 5th of September to do that. So I would really strongly recommend that you do go and have a look at the guidance, take into account what's been said today, and actually fill in your response as to whether you feel that this is a good way forward. What you've also got there is a link to the Levy Calculator that the government have actually created, and this is it's a fantastic tool. I've had a little play, and what it will help you do is actually look at all of the apprenticeships that are available, bearing in mind in terms of the levy, you can put that levy to frameworks or standards, so all are in scope, and it will help you actually look at all the different apprenticeships in your organisation that you might wish to engage with, and it will work out based on the information about your pay bill what different apprenticeships you could put in to maximise the use of your levy. So I would really recommend that you have a bit of a play with that, because as most organisations are quite complicated, whilst obviously we are passionate about leadership and management standards, we recognise that obviously there will be other apprenticeships that you're considering. So that tool will really help you work out what your pot looks like and what you can buy. And the last link there is around a proposal for the Register of Training Providers. I mentioned that the digital account will have a register built into it. And this is a consultation, again, closing the 5th of September, asking for views on what providers the standard should be, how that needs to be presented, and so on. So again, whether you're a provider, and obviously very pertinent to providers who are listening today, but also an employer, have a look and see, because this will be the mechanism by which you will be able to try and decide which provider is best for you and who you want to work with. So although you'll need to do some research and find out more about the different providers and their different offers, the matching piece will happen in the digital account, and this is the register that will be used. So we need to make sure we've got a really good pool of providers that are in that register for us to choose from. So now just moving on to a very short bit on the leadership and management standards, as you'd expect. So as we like to call it, the pathways to creating management as a true profession. And very much, this has all been led by a very strong and passionate employer steering group who have been developing these new trailblazer standards. And their view has always been that there needed to be individual standards that were very pertinent across a wide range of sectors and organisations for specific roles and levels of management within them, but also to create a really strong, clear progression pathway to help people navigate their way through a management career, moving right up to the top levels of leadership and management in an organisation. And this next slide just gives you a flavour for the way that that could look. And it is a sort of a stepped approach, but actually for a lot of organisations we're speaking to, it isn't necessarily such a straightforward process, but this gives you an idea of how the standards build and how they're developing. So what we have in place at the moment, and these are approved and ready for delivery, is a team leader supervisor role at level 3. We have an operations manager, departmental manager at level 5. We have the Chartered Manager Degree Apprenticeship, which at the moment are our absolute flagship standard and actually receiving a huge amount of press and publicity at the moment, particularly following obviously the A-level results and people thinking about where their career pathways are going. Is it a traditional academic route or is it a combination of work and academia? And one of the things that the employer group are very keen to develop is actually that next step up into executive leadership and management. So creating a senior leader level apprenticeship standard at a master's level. So that's a very new area. It's really pushing the boundaries. And all of this is partly to do with changing the mindsets about apprenticeships and just to which levels apprenticeships can operate. For us, this progression route aligns really nicely with our belief here in CMI about how you can professionally develop in your career as a manager. So we see a very nice mirror to the progression routes available through the apprenticeships, to the professional stages of development with CMI. So moving from student through to associate, becoming a member, chartered member, and a chartered fellow at the very top levels. So it's really reflecting that nice progression pathway professionally and also within the career. And just a quick little bit about the Chartered Manager Degree Apprenticeship. This was launched back in November last year, and we actually have nearly 60 apprentices who've actually started on their Chartered Manager Degree Apprenticeship journey already. So employers are already taking the plunge under the existing models to actually test out what this looks like, what it feels like for them. And really, this is one of the first degree apprenticeships that was actually launched to the business community, and we have seen a huge level of interest. I think it's fair to say that a number of employers are still working out what it means for them in terms of their mix of apprenticeships, particularly now that we're contemplating our planning for the levy. But there is a massive appetite for this. And this, remember, can apply to any individual in the organisation. It's about where they'll end up in terms of becoming a sort of middle to senior manager at the end of the apprenticeship. But what it does is it gives the individual and the organisation someone who has a full business degree. They will become a chartered manager through the process as well. But most importantly, everything they do in terms of their learning and development is immediately applied back in the workplace. So the return on investment starts to happen from day one. And we've already had feedback from employers who have apprentices going through this process that they are seeing massive impact 6 months in from the individuals they've got going through their Chartered Manager Degree Apprenticeship in comparison to the traditional graduate intake that they have running alongside them. So that's a really strong recommendation, anecdotal at the moment, but I think these things will add weight to the charge for using a degree apprenticeship as a means to really robustly develop your leaders and managers of the future. And it is for new staff, but also for existing staff. And we do have quite a lot of accidental managers, people who've fallen into management by dint of time served or being very technically competent in a particular area, but really perhaps could do with that development activity, may well like the opportunity to get perhaps their first degree ever as part of this process. And where this funding band sits is at £27,000. So when we go back to those 15 levels, it's at level 15, it's £27,000. And it is £27,000 at the moment under the current funding as well. And now we also have the two other standards, as I mentioned previously, team leader and the operations manager. So these are very much taking people from their first line management role, then moving into sort of the middle management role before they progress on up to this more senior levels. These two standards are very flexible in the way they can be delivered. For us, what's really exciting, and this was very much driven by the way the employers wanted the knowledge components of the standards to be developed, was to be able to embed a qualification. It's not prescribed, but the opportunity to embed a qualification such as our Chartered Management Institute Level 3 or Level 5 diploma within the standard as part of the development activity. And reflecting the fact that obviously you do have a huge knowledge component to make sure that people are fully competent across all of the components of the standards. These are not short-term apprenticeship standards to be thinking about. You know, we're talking about probably 18 months, possibly up to 3 years, depending on which levels they are. And in relation to the Chartered Management Institute CMDA, that could be up to a 4-year programme. It looks as though somebody may have lost the audio. I'm not sure if that's across the board or whether that is just one. It looks like it might be an isolated location at the moment. So what I've got there also is to recognise that in terms of the funding bands, the team leader sits at £5,000 and the operations manager at £9,000. And just to bear in mind, that's significantly more than the current frameworks at those levels would attract. So it does reflect the fact that there is a chunkier component of that learning and development activity going on within these. And let me just, now my screen has frozen, let me just try and move on. Ah, there we go. Right. One of the things that we have been doing, and we'll continue to look at this, is actually to look at parental attitudes to apprenticeships. And primarily this was actually done when we launched the degree apprenticeship last year, to survey parents to say, actually, what were their views of degree apprenticeships? And what we're seeing is there is a major shift in perception from parents around what an apprenticeship actually means. To be fair, the majority weren't even aware that a degree apprenticeship was an option, but once it was explained to them, what we did find is that obviously parents were particularly attracted by this concept of degree apprenticeships, bearing in mind that obviously it could mean an individual looking at embarking on their professional career would move through the apprenticeship and achieve their full management business degree. They would have chartered manager status, they would have achieved the apprenticeship, they would have been fully employed throughout that apprenticeship, and therefore have built a really strong start in their CV. So parents are finding this incredibly attractive. We're certainly seeing a lot of young people looking at this now as a real alternative to the traditional university route, and actually UCAS do have a page on degree apprenticeships and an area to encourage those people looking at their options to consider this as a progression pathway for them. And it'll be very interesting to see how perceptions continue to change, and particularly with the other higher level apprenticeships coming in, so things like the operations manager at level 5, how that also reflects in relation to attitudes by parents. But I think we shouldn't, in all of this, lose sight of the fact that there are some key challenges that all of us are facing in relation to apprenticeships. There is still a case for apprenticeship snobbery. The word apprenticeship has certain connotations for some individuals and some employers, so a huge amount to do to get over the message that actually this is a very different approach now. This is a high quality, robust process that an individual goes through, and there is real value in it for the employer and for the individual. There's also a need for a significant increase in employer engagement. You know, we have a lot of young people and existing members of the workforce who are really excited and want to get involved in apprenticeships, but we need those places to be made available for them to be able to take this forward. And it's about generally raising awareness of apprenticeships and the opportunities they present, and really an opportunity to widen participation. What we see is that actually, particularly in relation to things like degree apprenticeships and higher level apprenticeships, it's a different route for individuals who may not have been able to consider university as an option for themselves. So hopefully what we'll see is a much more diverse set of individuals embarking on degree apprenticeships in particular going forward. And what we can do here at CMI, we're very keen to really support employers and providers to help them understand the apprenticeship agenda, to help them understand what their individual needs are in an organisation. And so therefore we actually are here to support you as you start thinking about your apprenticeship programmes going forward. We would be delighted to be able to talk to you about what you need in terms of apprenticeships, and particularly bear in mind the Levy, which is focusing a great deal of attention on workforce planning. How existing programmes that you may deliver in your organisations may be matched into the Trailblazer standards as part of the on-programme delivery. How we can map into existing qualifications. Recommending to you the best way to deliver your apprenticeships. Some employers are providers in their own right, some are looking for new providers to work with. So there are lots of different options to consider. And just making sure that you are ready to take advantage of this from next April once the new levy funding kicks in and the new funding regime kicks in. But that doesn't mean that you might not want to start a little pilot now to test out the model, so we can help you find the right providers, put you in touch with the right people to make sure that you can start that little cohort piloting process now, should you wish to. Remember, 2/3, 1/3 funding is still very attractive. And also, we can help you understand what the professional route looks like in terms of how CMI can support your leaders and managers move through their journey to professional recognition and chartered manager. So that's sort of how we're sort of hoping that we can help you navigate this whole new landscape. And we're definitely here to help. We have a huge amount of collateral and resources to help you with this already. We've developed a number of case studies and videos. These are all on the website at the bottom. We have a new microsite which is very whizzy and will provide you with a huge amount of information. We have a directory of the different providers who are able to deliver the leadership and management standards. We have guidance, research, documentation, infographics to simply show how things like the levy, for example, work and what it means. And obviously you can download copies of the standards and assessment plans from there. They're the Crown copyrighted versions, so you can actually see what the standards look like and how the endpoint assessment would shape up. And obviously, as mentioned previously, the Levy Calculator is in the mix as well. So lots of resources to help you if you want to be able to help yourself before talking to us. So really this is the start of a journey for many of you, I know. We're here to help. We'd love to be able to talk to you about what your needs are and how we can best help you. But I think you've probably heard enough from me in terms of going through the slide deck. And I will now look to the questions and hopefully be able to take a few questions and provide some answers. And where I can't, then obviously I will come back to you with some answers there if at all possible. So let me scroll up, just expand this out so I can see more. Okay. Bear with me while I just expand the box out. Okay. Navigating a new system. Right, so everybody could hear me, that's all fine. I can move down those. Okay. So first question was, can we get a copy of these slides after the webinar? Yes, you can. They will be circulated. You will actually get a recording of the entire thing as well, so you will get all of the information you need. And we also do have a nice, neat little infographic on the levy, which obviously may help you articulate just what that means to a wider audience. So we'll make sure that you have copies of those as well. So in terms of the source for the statistics, the sample size, etc., I'm assuming that this may be in relation to the statistics around apprenticeships. Let me just flick back to the relevant page. These have all come from government, so these are figures that they have collected, but I will get you the exact sources for those statistics. A question here around the 3 million payroll for each company. Is it a group or is it in the number of companies in a group or the group as a whole? It is for the group as a whole. And one of the things that the organisations where it's a more complicated structure will need to work out is how that works. So the money will be collected from across the group and then you will need to work out how that is divvied back down to make sure that different parts of the organisation actually get their share, if that's appropriate, of that levy contribution. Okay. So one question here about, for companies who are not paying the levy, how do we access the apprenticeship funding arrangements? You will need to work with your provider. So the provider at the moment, the way the model works is the provider manages the entire funding process between themselves and the skills funding agency. So once you've identified your learning provider who will work with you, they will need to be on the register of training organisations, and they will need to have a skills funding agency contract to be able to deliver apprenticeships. But what the training provider will then be able to do is actually make sure that you will need to pay them your proportion of the 2/3, 1/3 model at the moment, and they will then draw down the money from the skills funding agency for the 2/3. And going forward, for those who are not paying the levy, as we understand it, until the digital account kicks in for those non-levy payers, that's the same model that will apply. So it will be a case of setting up the arrangements with the training provider, making the payment to the training provider, and they will draw down the funding. But I think we'll probably find that there is a lot more detail on how that process will work when the next set of guidance comes out in October. Okay, so next question, where can I definitively find out what the funding band is for all my existing apprenticeship frameworks? On the set of links that I gave you in the slides, which you will get obviously later on, there is actually a link through to the funding proposal. It's the first bullet, and this is on slide 21. If you click onto that page, it will actually take you through to the relevant part of the .gov website, and there is actually a document that you can download which actually sets out all of the different standards and the frameworks and tells you which funding band has been applied to which particular framework and or standard. So you will actually be able to see that information. So hopefully that will help you with that one. Okay, so then there's a question, I assume the 90% will be paid once the levy has been exhausted? Absolutely, yes. So you will draw from your levy pot, and once there is no money left in the levy pot, that's when the model will revert to the 10%, 90%. Okay. Some very good questions here. Okay, one question, can the levy be used for existing staff? It can be used for any staff. So the beauty going forward is that under this funding model, it is for any learner, anybody you are putting on an apprenticeship. So new staff or existing staff, any age. Bear in mind, obviously, the incentives for taking on a new member of staff who may be between 16 and 18 if you're an under 50 sized employer, and also those who are coming from perhaps a more disadvantaged background up to the age of 24. Okay. So, oh gosh, here's a tricky question and one that I probably can't answer, but it's a good one. As most new standards won't be ready for delivery for some time, do you feel the funding bands proposed for delivering current frameworks will be sufficient? They don't seem to take into consideration the employer contribution we currently have to secure for older learners. It's a very good question, and who knows to a certain extent. I know that there is a lot of thought that goes into the allocation of the funding bands and aligning the new standards with the most pertinent funding model. So we would hope that actually going forward they will be sufficient to deliver, but we just don't know. But I would imagine that it will be fine. Certainly our experience in terms of, obviously, some of our standards are very new and haven't yet actually started delivery in terms of the team leader and the operations manager. But talking to providers, we feel that they are absolutely deliverable within that amount. But I suppose the proof will be in what happens once we start delivery. Okay, one question. So a question here, if we have until the 5th of September to comment on the policy, where do we comment? Again, going back to slide 21, there's a link through you'll find there, which is on the proposals for funding consultation to the 5th of September. The link there will take you directly through to the consultation space, it's citizen space, where you can input your views. But please do read the guidance documentation first to feel that you've got the full picture and can actually sort of give a really informed comment back. Okay. There's a very technical one here around in-house delivery. So looking to deliver in-house using your own people. I'm not absolutely sure on this one, Catherine, so what I will do is have a look into that and get back to you. But I know there are models by which an employer can deliver their own training. They become the provider in their own right, so there are models there and those will continue. So I'm sure that actually there will be a way to navigate this, but I will come back to you on that particular one. Okay. There's a question regarding co-investment. If there is no money left and you go to the co-investment model, is it for the lifetime of the apprenticeship or for an individual, or until more money goes into your account? As I understand it, it's almost looked at on a monthly basis, but obviously that would be quite tricky to work out in terms of how the funding works. But having not seen how the calculator works in terms of the digital account, I'm not 100% sure on that. But I would imagine that in terms of knowing what your commitments are, it would be for the apprenticeships. The funding is set at the time of the apprenticeship start. That's certainly the model that we have at the moment, and it would seem sensible that continues, but that is only my observation, and I suspect that more detail will come in October when we get a lot more detail about exactly how the model will work, and a lot more information about the digital account, which will come through between now and sort of March next year. A question here saying, could our own in-house development program be recognised as eligible for funding? So yes, I mean, it would probably depend on which way you wanted to do it. Obviously, you could become an employer provider in your own right, which would enable you to draw down that funding. You could also look at mapping your existing program to existing qualifications and seeing where those mapped across. So we are working with a number of employers to help them map across their in-house programs to, say, for example, a certificate or a diploma, which they will then look to wrap into the apprenticeship. So there's a couple of different routes that you could consider there. So a question here by one person, unfortunately it looks like he's left, but I will still respond to it. Is the Chartered Manager Degree Apprenticeship entirely generic, not industry or discipline specific? So it actually is a generic one, and the reason for that is because actually when we consulted with a huge number of employers across different sizes and sectors, the core components of leadership and management were actually the same. So we did actually take it as a cross-cutting theme approach. However, what we do know is that quite a few providers have been very innovative and are working with employers to sort of add a sector flavour to the CMDA. So, for example, we know that MMU are providing some really exciting wraparounds to sectorise the CMDA in response to employer demand. So it can be tailored, but the core components of the standard will remain the same. Okay. There's one here, it's a question about whether someone can transfer up through levels whilst they're on programme with an apprenticeship. So someone starting as a team leader and in that time successful for promotion, transferring up to operations manager without financial detriment to the employer. So what we would probably hope to see in this situation is the employer thinking very much about where the individual will end up in and which time scale. So very much trying to align that process. But what we could see, I'm quite confident, is that actually there would be the ability to move people through programs. But obviously what we would hope to see probably is that actually an individual would work through their team leader apprenticeship and complete and achieve that, and then possibly move into the next level and moving up to the operations manager. But what we could always see in that is actually an acknowledgement of the prior learning that's taken place. So actually recognising that all of that good work, knowledge building skills, activity has happened as part of the team leader apprenticeship as they move up. I don't feel that there will be financial detriment to the employer, and you always have as an employer the opportunity to stop an apprenticeship at any particular point. It just means the payments will stop at that particular point in time that you do that. One thing to bear in mind is that the government are saying they're weighting 20% of the funding to the back end of the apprenticeship, so that actually there is sufficient to make sure that the endpoint assessment is completed. So they are, obviously very keen on completions of apprenticeships, and that will be a big driver for them. Okay. Okay, one question here. Will the levy be charged every year and not just as a one-off? I'm afraid it will. Yes, it's an ongoing process, so on a monthly basis it will come off the pay bill. HMRC will take that money. So yes, it will be an ongoing process. And bear in mind, in terms of your levy pot, you have 18 months to draw down the money that's within that. So you will need to think about that particular process and not leave it all till the very end, because you don't want to lose any of that money that's in your pot. Okay, there's a few questions here from providers on the webinar about processes for registering on the roto, etc. Can I just highlight, we do actually have an apprenticeship webinar that's happening next Wednesday, the 31st of August at the same time, specifically for providers. So we will actually be able to talk you through not just a quick update on the levy, but also about how at CMI we're sort of pulling together a nice support package for you to help you with all of this, and to try and share as much information as we have around the processes and so on. So Steph, if I can highlight that one to you, and if you can join us next week, that would be fantastic. Okay. There are quite a few more questions, but most of them I think are actually covered probably by other things that I've talked about. Just one question here around a large company based in England who do have quite a few employees in Scotland. Is there anything in the pipeline for that portion of the workforce? I believe that things will start to become clearer soon. We certainly hope so. We know there's a lot of interest in what's going on in England. In Scotland, there's very much an interest in what's happening around whether higher and degree apprenticeships will actually be part of the mix from the funding pot going forward. But we haven't got any clarity yet on exactly what that looks like. We're keeping an eye on it, certainly the same for Wales and also Northern Ireland. So there'll be a lot more information to follow, I'm sure, but I know there's frustration amongst employers still waiting to find that information out. Okay, and just I'll finish with the last question because I'm just conscious we're heading up into the last couple of seconds of the webinar. What happens if a member of staff leaves midway through the programme? Can they finish off their apprenticeship with a trainer, or will they need another employer? They will need another employer, so they can transfer that apprenticeship across to the new employer, provided the new employer is willing to accept it. But there is quite a lot of information in the Skills Funding Agency guidance about the process for managing apprenticeships, where an individual is either made redundant or is actually moved, needs to move geographical area, or actually needs to withdraw from the apprenticeship. So there's a number of different models, and there are always scenarios that can be worked through to help support that apprentice in that situation. Right, okay, brilliant, great stuff. Looking forward to next week. Thank you very much. That's it, everybody. We're time up. Thank you so much for your attention. Some really great questions there. I hope you found it of value. Apologies for any stumbling or stuttering that I managed to have while we're going through. This is my first of this type of webinar, so it's been a learning curve for myself, but very an enjoyable one, and hopefully I will get to speak to a number of you as you think about what you want to do with apprenticeships. You've got my contact details in the slide deck, so please don't hesitate to get in touch and take advantage of all the support that we can give. Thank you very much, everybody. Bye-bye. Have a good afternoon.